Close your eyes and drive Oregon in the dark. The freeway is an artery, the coast a wet lung, and every side road is a nerve ending waiting to be touched. Down in the Shanghai tunnels, a ledger writes your name by itself. In Baker City, a blue dress steps into a shaft that never stops descending. A lighthouse beam hesitates, then shows a mother her child. The hospital's morgue slides 1 inch, polite as a promise. Waldo Hall holds its breath so you don't. A man of bandages asks you to bring him back to the sea. The cave counts debts in drops. Golden stitches a hymn to a river and forgets how to sing it. And in the Dalles, a closed pharmacy rings the bell because someone still needs water. If these stories found you in the dark, leave a light for the next traveler. Like the video, share it with the one friend who will keep you company at 3:03 a.m. And subscribe so the next true Oregon night finds you before it finds your door. Turn on notifications, because the scariest things don't knock twice. I didn't book the Geyser Grant for the ghost. I booked it because my divorce was final at 3:12 p.m., and by 6 I was driving east without a map, just following the longest road away from everything I'd tried to hold together. Baker City rose out of the dusk like a memory someone else had. Brick and gold light and a sky that looked rinsed clean. The hotel was impossible to miss. A high Victorian face trimmed in cream. Arched windows, the sort of place that still thinks the word parlor means something. I told myself I needed a quiet room and a strong drink. I got both. I also got her. They gave me 302. The clerk's smile faltered a heartbeat when he read the key tag, then returned like a curtain snapped back into place. I was too tired to notice the way he asked, "Will you be with us just the one night?" Like it was a warning phrased as hospitality. The carpet smelled faintly of lemons and old perfume. Up the staircase, past oil portraits whose eyes didn't quite follow. Past a mirror that seemed to hold on to shapes after you'd moved away. I remember thinking, this is how you restart a life, in a place that belonged to a different century. The room was tall and quiet, the ceiling trimmed with plaster roses, the kind of bed you fall into and don't come out of for days. I set my bag down and stood at the window watching Main Street empty itself onto the night. A freight train hummed somewhere far off, a long, low sound like a breath you've been holding too long. I should have unpacked. I should have showered. Instead, I went downstairs to the bar, because grief is loud and bourbon makes it speak in a lower register. I had 2. Maybe 3. Enough to make the edges of the day soften. Not enough to make them kind. When I came back up, the hall felt cooler. Not cold, cool like a church in summer, a stored shade. My key turned on the second try. I stepped in, closed the door, and froze. The room smelled different. Not the hotel clean blend from before. Something powder sweet like violets pressed between book pages. I stood there with my hand still on the knob and told myself it was nothing. Memory. Old building. Someone's perfume carried by the vents. I didn't turn on the overhead. Just the bedside lamp. The light was a warm circle that didn't quite reach the corners. I plugged my phone in. I sat on the bed. I told the room out loud, "I'm not here for any of it, okay?" The room did not answer. At 1:17, the water in the bathroom ran for 2 seconds and stopped. I was awake enough to believe I'd imagined it, asleep enough not to get up and check. At 2:03, the closet door clicked softly, the exact sound wood makes when it relaxes back into place after being opened and held. I rolled onto my back and stared at the ceiling roses. I told myself, old building, pipes, settlement. I told myself many things that had the shape of lies and the temperature of courage. At 3:09, the bed dipped as if someone sat down at the edge. Every cell in my body went very still, the way deer do when they hear a twig break in fog. The dip wasn't heavy. It barely moved the mattress, the kind of weight a child would make or a woman built of air. I didn't breathe. I didn't look. I kept my eyes on the ceiling and watched the roses blur as my heartbeat migrated into my throat. The scent of violets tightened like a fist closing. "Do you see me?" The voice came from just to my left, level with my shoulder, calm and curious as if she were standing at a window asking about the weather. I turned. Of course I turned. There was no one on the bed. There was the impression of someone having been there, the fabric slightly furrowed, the way a pillow remembers your head for a moment after you rise. The far corner of the room held its own darkness deeper than it should have been, and in that depth a shape arranged itself, a long dress the exact blue of twilight. A figure angled slightly as if she favored one foot, a face that wouldn't hold still long enough to understand, as though I were looking through tears that hadn't fallen yet. I said, and stopped because the sentence didn't know where it was going. She tilted like a question. You think you know how you'll react if you ever see a ghost? You think you'll scream, or you'll pray, or you'll go pragmatic and start negotiating with your own sanity. What I did was stupid. I tried to help. Are you okay? I said the dumbest thing anyone has ever asked the dead. Do you need... She stepped closer. Not walked. Stepped. From the corner to the edge of lamplight in the space between blinks. The way sun moves across a wall when you're not looking. The blue of her dress absorbed the light without returning it. Lace at the throat. Hair pinned escaping in a soft cloud. The smell of violets thickened until I could taste it. It wasn't cloying. It was old. A scent that had been waiting. Do you see me? She asked again. Softer now. Not pleading. Not testing. Measuring. Yes, I said. And the word felt like permission I hadn't meant to grant. The room adjusted around that answer. The lamp dimmed a degree. The window glass creaked like it had leaned in to listen. Somewhere out in the hall, a clock I hadn't noticed earlier ticked twice and then stopped entirely, as if time itself were politely stepping out to give us privacy. She sat where the mattress had dipped, and this time I watched it happen. The impression formed shallow, precise. The blanket pulled gently, a slow settling. She angled toward me, and though her face kept refusing to resolve, I got the sense of eyes. Not black or hollow or glowing, just present. Watching me with a concentration that felt intimate enough to be invasive. I need my key, she said. He took it. Your key, I repeated like a student prompting himself while the teacher waits. Who took it? The lamplight trembled without the bulb flickering. Her head tipped. The hallway clock, the one that had stopped, gave a single talk like a warning swallowed late. He promised, she said, and something in her voice slipped then, a crack along porcelain. He said he would come back. He said he would bring me up, but he only locked the door. I stood too fast, the floor coming up a little, then settling. The closet door was half ajar now. I hadn't left it that way. I crossed to it thinking, don't do this, you are inviting something you don't understand, and pulled it open anyway. Dresses hung there, not mine, not anyone's I could imagine alive. Silhouettes from a century ago, gauze and silk shadow impressions that shifted when the air moved as if breath belonged to them. On the shelf, a wooden box. No dust, no hotel inventory tag. The lid wasn't latched. Behind me, the bed creaked. Please, she said. And for the first time, the word carried weight, a gravity that pulled on the room itself. He locked me in. I touched the box. My skin went cold enough to wring. I lifted the lid. Inside, on blue velvet that hadn't faded, was a single brass skeleton key. I should have closed the box and slept in my car. I should have taken the stairs and driven until the sun made a liar out of every dark thought I'd ever had. Instead, I turned with the key in my hand and asked a ghost, where does this go? Her hand rose, a pale, suggested curve of fingers, and pointed at the wall. Not at the door I'd come through, but at the section of plaster between the window and the headboard. I stared. There was nothing there. Just paint, faint crackle. The seam line where wallpaper had been stripped and replaced decades ago. Behind, she whispered, where he hid the door. The lamp flickered hard enough to throw shadows like knives. The hallway clock gave back its missing seconds in a single long talk that didn't stop, just lowered into a hum I felt in my teeth. The smell of violets sharpened into something else, something scorched and sweet. And in the plaster where there had only been wall, A line appeared. Hair thin. Vertical. The suggestion of a seam that hadn't been touched since blue was the color of evenings that never ended. "Do you see me now?" she asked. I slid the brass key into nothing and felt it find a lock I couldn't see. The tumblers turned like bones remembering their names. When the lock turned, the sound was small but final. A sigh pulled through a keyhole. The line in the plaster split open. Not a door exactly, but an absence of wall. I stepped back as cold air rolled out. The smell of violets collapsing under the heavier scent of iron and wet dust. My lamp flared once and steadied. She was gone from the bed. Only the impression remained, the weight memory of her shape pressed into fabric. The opening revealed a space barely wider than a coffin, taller than me by a few inches. Plaster flakes littered the floor like old snow. Inside, the air was colder, sharper, as if it had been held there for a century waiting for release. I raised the lamp and saw that the chamber wasn't empty. On the far wall carved into the wood were letters, uneven, done in haste. Lucy 1902. The rest of the wall was scorched black. Smoke stains climbed toward the ceiling in uneven fingers. I found the lamp socket on the inside and twisted the switch out of habit. It didn't work, but the brass key in my hand was warm now, almost humming. I took one step into the hidden room. The floor sank slightly as if it resented my weight. My throat closed on the taste of old smoke. There was a shape in the corner. Cloth slumped over wood, the faint glint of metal. I knelt and brushed the dust away. It was a small chair, half-burned, and on its seat a ring of char around what might once have been a lamp base. The burn had crawled up the wall and stopped at the carved name, leaving the letters raw and unscathed. Behind me, the key clicked again, by itself, turning in the lock I couldn't see. The seam of light where I had entered faded. I was sealed in, I told myself. It's fine. There's a vent. There's air. The door will open. Logic keeps the dark from getting teeth. But the longer I stood there, the less the air felt shared. The cold didn't come from outside anymore. It came from behind me, coalescing like a person choosing a shape. She said the same thing. The voice whispered. Lower now. Closer. I spun, lamp jerking. The blue of her dress filled the narrow space, brushing both walls. Her head was down, hair loose this time, not the careful twist from before. Smoke curled from the hem of the dress in thin gray threads that faded before they reached the floor. Who? I asked. Who said it? He promised, she said again. The words slower now, stretched thin. He promised the elevator would bring me up, but it only brought the fire. My chest tightened. I'd read the stories years ago. Hotel archives, small-town tragedy. A servant caught in a service shaft when a lamp fell. Fire taking the basement and the girl. They'd rebuilt, painted over, opened new. Nobody mentioned her name, Lucy, I said. Her head lifted. The air flexed between us, pressure building like a storm refusing to arrive. The dress lightened at the edges, fabric turning transparent enough for me to see the carved name through her ribs. She took one step forward. I could smell the scorch on her skin. The violets burned into tar. Her eyes met mine, gray, full of something beyond rage, beyond pain. A knowledge that shouldn't have survived. You have my key, she said. I can give it back. My voice cracked on the second word. I held the brass out like an offering, arm shaking. She didn't reach for it. She only looked at it and said, he left it to me. He said we'd run, but he locked the door from outside. She drifted past me, the cold cutting my sleeve, and pressed her hand against the inner wall. Wood side. Her fingers left prints black with soot. I knocked, she said, so quiet it almost didn't leave her mouth. No one came. I didn't know what else to do. The historian instinct again. Bear witness, record the testimony. You don't have to stay here, I said. You can leave. She looked back, that ghost tilt of the head that felt almost human. And go where? There wasn't an answer, only the sound of the hallway clock returning to life, ticking slow and steady beyond the wall. She turned back to the carved letters, traced them once, then opened her hand. The brass key lifted from my palm as if caught by invisible strings and floated toward her. When she took it, light flared blue-white, filling the narrow space until the walls lost their edges. The air vibrated, then silence. When my sight cleared, the room was ordinary again. The scorch marks were gone. The carved name remained but faint, almost polished. The seam behind me had reopened. My lamp burned steady yellow. I stumbled out. The hallway was empty. The hotel breathed its usual warm air, the faint hum of the elevator cables rising through the shaft. I turned to look back and the wall was whole. No crack, no door, no sign anything had been there. I went downstairs. The night clerk looked up, startled to see me so pale. I set the key on the counter. He frowned. "Where'd you get that?" 302, I said. He stared at the number. "That's impossible. We retired that key 20 years ago. It was lost in the fire." "There wasn't a fire," I said, because that was what his face needed to hear. He nodded slowly, eyes somewhere past me. "Right, no fire. I should have left then, but I asked, 'Her name was Lucy?'" He didn't answer. He just reached under the counter, brought up a thin folder and slid it toward me. "You don't need to open it," he said, but I already was. Inside were newspaper clippings. 1902. Chambermaid perishes in elevator blaze. The photo was grainy, but the dress was unmistakable. Blue, darker near the hem where smoke had caught it. I left the key on the desk and walked outside into the pre-dawn cold. The street lamps threw halos in the fog. I could see my reflection in the glass door, except it wasn't alone. For a second, there she was beside me, faint. A woman in blue smiling just enough to make me doubt the sadness in it. Then she stepped backward into the reflection and was gone. The hotel still stands. They say room 302 stays vacant, though the front desk never admits why. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I search for its live feed on travel sites. The camera pans the lobby, the staircase, the landing. And always, for just one frame out of hundreds, there's a flicker of blue on the stairs. I tell myself it's compression artifacts. I tell myself a lot of things. But when the scent of violets finds me in cities I've never been, I still check the mirrors to see if she's caught up. I didn't go back to the Geyser Grand after that night, but she followed me anyway. For a week after, everywhere I stayed, highway motels, a cousin's guest room, even a cabin outside Bend, the same smell would bloom out of nowhere. Not perfume from a living person, not air freshener. That same pressed violet scent, faint at first, then stronger, then gone, always around 3 in the morning. Always when I was alone. At first I told myself it was memory. The brain can do that. Hold a smell, a sound, replay it when you're tired. But then the photographs started. I'd take a picture and a gas station, a road sign, a random diner. Later, scrolling through my phone, I'd see a streak of blue at the edge of the frame. Not a lens flare. Not a car, cloth, lace at the throat. Hair pinned high. Always turned just enough that her face was unreadable. I deleted them. They came back. One night, camped beside a river, I woke to the sound of an elevator bell. Sharp, metallic, echoing where no elevator could exist. The tent was glowing faintly blue. I sat up, heart hammering, and there she was. Not inside, at the zipper, looking in. Her hands pressed lightly to the fabric. Her eyes, clearer now, full of something I didn't expect. Not hunger. Not anger. Expectation. "You still have the key," she whispered. I gave it back, I said, but my hand was already in my jacket pocket. My fingers closed around cold brass. It was there, heavy, warm like before. My voice broke. "What do you want from me?" She tilted her head. The hem of her dress swayed, though there was no wind. "Open the door." "What door?" "The one he built for me." She slid her hand down the tent, leaving a smear of soot that wasn't there when I unzipped it. Outside, the night was still, the river dark. No footprints, no woman. Only the smell of violets. I sat there until dawn. The key burned against my palm until I dropped it. It didn't hit the floor. It just wasn't in my hand anymore. That day, I drove back to Baker City. Something in me already knew I would. I parked across from the hotel, engine off, watching its windows glow against the early evening. Nothing moved. The lobby looked empty, but every so often I'd see the shadow of someone cross behind the curtains upstairs. Long dress, pinned hair. I went inside. The same clerk was on duty. He didn't look surprised. He handed me a different key this time without asking. "We're closing early tonight," he said, and his voice had that careful softness people use with the grieving. "Room 302? I asked. He hesitated. "No, 301. Next door." The hallway felt longer than I remembered. The carpet pattern crawled under my eyes, twisting roses and vines. When I reached the room, I didn't go in. I stood in front of the door of 302 instead. My hand lifted to knock, though I didn't plan it. The wood was cool. It hummed faintly like a wire-carrying current. The brass key appeared in my palm again. I didn't even see it materialize. It was just there waiting. I slid it into the lock. The door opened without a sound. Inside, the room was empty. No bed, no lamp. Just the skeleton of the old service shaft. Brick walls blackened by time, elevator cables trailing into dark. The air smelled of violets and smoke. And standing at the far end where the shaft dropped away was Lucy. She looked different, clearer, more solid, like she'd been gathering herself. Her dress no longer frayed, her hair pinned exactly as it must have been the night she died. She smiled. Not a warm smile. Not cruel either. Just final. "You brought me my key," she said. I nodded. "You can leave now." "I don't understand." "You opened the door." She stepped backward into the shaft. The blue of her dress caught the dim light and scattered it like water. "He locked it from outside," she said. "You unlocked it. I can go." And then she was gone. Not fell, not vanished. Just stepped out of sight the way someone steps into another room. The smell faded. The air warmed. The walls no longer hummed. The elevator cables hung slack, lifeless. I left the hotel before sunrise. I didn't check out. I didn't tell the clerk what had happened. On the drive west, my phone stayed dark. No photos, no blue streaks, no violet scent. For the first time since that night in 302, I slept through until morning. I tell people now that Baker City was just a stopover, a place to kill an evening on a long drive. I don't tell them about the hidden door or the key, or the way a ghost asked me to finish what someone else had promised. But sometimes, when an elevator door closes behind me, I think I hear a soft voice say, "Thank you," and smell the faintest trace of violets pressed between old pages. I took the night shifts because I like being alone with useful work. Keep the lens clean, check the foghorn, log the weather, watch the black water breathe. That's the job. The day crew smiles for tourists, tells stories about the resident ghost, the keeper's wife who lost a child and never left. I don't tell stories. I climb the spiral stairs, I oil the gears, I put light where there isn't any. The rest is wind and superstition. The first thing I noticed that week was the way the beam stuttered when it swept north. Not a full skip, a hiccup. A heartbeat of dim before the Fresnel lens caught again and flung itself into the night. I checked the bulb housing, the regulators, the carriage rollers. Everything moved like it should. The stutter kept happening. Always in the same place, like the light had learned to blink at something I couldn't see. Fog came in off the Pacific, thick as breath on glass. When fog eats the cliff, the world compresses to the room inside the lantern and the sound of surf you can't judge the distance of. I logged visibility at 50 yards and ran the horn test. The note rolled down the cliff and came back wrong, softer than expected, like the ocean had put up a hand and said, "Not now." On my second midnight, I carried the rag and kerosene up for the lens. It's a ritual that makes sense to me. Circles upon circles, prisms like frozen soap, brass fittings catching little galaxies of light. I've cleaned church windows and lab glass. Nothing on earth throws light like a first-order Fresnel. I wiped in slow arcs, talking to the night without words, the way you do when you're inside a machine that's older than your grandparents. The stutter hit again, the beam thinning to a fade for the span of a swallow. In that fade, I saw a shape in the glass. Not a reflection, an absence. A woman's profile turned away, hair coiled low, chin tipped as if she were listening for a name. I stopped breathing until the beam filled itself back in and the shape vanished. I stared at the curve where she'd been. My mind did the sensible math of smudge, glare, fatigue. But my fingertips went cold in that specific way you can't argue with. The logbook lay open on the little desk under the clock. I wrote slight dimming at bearing 330 deg. Possible particulate or salt film. Then I kept my rag moving because stopping felt like permission. At 2:11 a.m. the keeper's house below went dark. It shouldn't have. There's always one lamp on in the kitchen for overnight. I leaned out and the fog swallowed everything, even the white of the eaves. The horn groaned once and died. I went down with the toolkit and a story ready for myself about moisture in the contacts. I don't remember deciding to bring the old brass key from the drawer by the logbook. My hand was just closed around it when I hit the service level. The door from the tower to the catwalk stuck halfway like something leaned against it from the outside. When it gave, it opened into fog punched full of light by the rotating beam. Each sweep turned the mist into a world and then erased it. The catwalk rail beaded with water that felt oily, heavier than fog should feel on skin. The horn housing sits on a plinth to the windward side. I reached it and found the panel open and the fuse intact. I could hear the ocean working the rocks below in slow violence. I could hear gulls asleep with their heads tucked into storm. And under it, like a sound you don't hear so much as learn, a woman crying as if the air had been taught her grief. I said her name without knowing it. I said, Mrs. Mercer? The story they tell the tourists uses that name. Wife of the keeper, 1890s. Baby died. She waited with the lamp and watched a ship that didn't come home. I never learned if Mercer was real. I only know the fog changed when I said it, thinning just enough to show the north path down toward the keeper's house. A print showed on the wet plank I stood on. Not a shoe. Barefoot, small, as if someone had just stepped there and was too polite to make a sound. The horn coughed and stayed dead. The beam rolled across me, and in its thin moment I saw her again. Not in the lens this time, but on the path. A length of fabric pale as fish belly, and a hand holding a lantern that didn't burn. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me at the cliff's edge and the black that waits there like a mouth. I should have turned back and radioed the Coast Guard for the horn. I should have written a neat line in the log about putting safety first. Instead, I followed her. The north path is narrow. Gravel skittering to emptiness if you step stupid. Fog makes a wall and your own feet become an argument with gravity. She moved like fog moves, the lantern a suggestion in her hand. I didn't see her face, just the slope of her shoulders and that tilt that women get when they are carrying the weight of something that can't be put down. Halfway down, she stopped so suddenly the fog bunched around her like fabric. I smelled something sweet and wrong, like iron warmed in milk. I remember the exact place because my boot toe touched the split in the old wood post that marks the bend, the one the day crew keeps meaning to replace. She turned slightly. I thought she was turning to me, but her head angled lower, towards something on the ground I couldn't see. "Do you hear him?" she asked. The voice came without air, like a thought planted directly in the ear. Every part of me went cold. I said I didn't hear anything because I didn't. Only the sea deciding and undeciding whether to strike. Her lantern brightened without flame, lifting the fog enough to show the little pocket of earth between the path and the drop. A toy lay there, a carved boat a child would push through puddles, the edges smoothed by a hand that loved it into shape. It was wet though it hadn't rained. A loop of twine trailed from its bow and vanished over the cliff. "Do you hear him?" she asked again. And the second time there was a brittle music in it. I crouched. The twine hummed under my fingers, a vibration traveling up from the ocean, thin as insect wings. Far below, something knocked against rock in a steady rhythm, like a line drawing a plea in Morse. I leaned out and the fog opened its mouth. I saw a pale hand on the line, tiny fingers hooked, pulling with the patience of the dead. The path shifted under my weight. Gravel murmured off the edge and fell until the falling became part of the sea. I grabbed the post with one hand and the humming twine with the other. Something gave from below, not a tug but a release, and the vibration ran up my arm hard enough to make my teeth click. When I looked back at her, the lantern was a little brighter and the part of the fog that held her face tried to make features. For a breath I saw a mouth that had learned to pray and eyes made of waiting. "Bring him up," she said, and the last word didn't sound like English anymore. My fingers closed around the line and the line closed around me. The twine burned through my glove, slicing the skin on my palm as it tightened. It wasn't rope anymore. It was memory given weight, pulling from below with more strength than should have existed in water that cold. I braced against the post, but the line yanked again and I felt my boot edge slip on the damp gravel. "Stop," I shouted, though I didn't know who I was talking to, her, the sea, or the thing below. The woman in the fog didn't move. She just watched, that lantern in her hand glowing soft and steady. her face still carved from nothing but pale light. I could hear the hum of the line rising in pitch higher and higher, until it wasn't a sound anymore but a pressure behind my eyes. Then it stopped. The rope went slack, heavy in my palm. The sea below sighed once, and in that single exhale I saw something break the surface. A small wooden boat, half-rotted, coated in barnacles, floating in circles, slow and deliberate, like something breathing through wood. I swear it wasn't there a moment before. The twine in my hand led straight down to it, knotted around its bow. "Bring him up," she whispered again, softer this time, and the fog thinned around her mouth. Her lips didn't move. The words came from the air itself, curling through the mist. I looked down. There was something inside that boat. At first, I thought it was a trick of the waves, a shadow of driftwood maybe. But when the next rotation came, I saw it clearly. A small, pale hand pressed against the side of the boat. Fingers curled over the edge, my throat closed. Oh God. The woman stepped closer to the cliff, still watching the sea. "He's been waiting for me," she said. "Every night I light the way, but he never finds the shore." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Tonight he found you instead." I dropped the twine. It didn't fall. It hung there, still connected, pulsing faintly like it was breathing. "I can't," I whispered. "I can't help you." Her head turned then, slow and deliberate. For the first time she faced me fully. Her face wasn't monstrous, just wrong. Too clean, too preserved. Like porcelain pulled from ashes. Her eyes weren't black or glowing. They were empty sky, the color of morning fog. "Yes, you can," she said. "You're the keeper." The air shifted and every part of the lighthouse behind me groaned. I could feel the light above us stutter, the same hiccup in the beam, that split second of darkness where something else slid through. The hum deepened, and in the flicker, the cliff beneath my feet wasn't stone anymore. It was wood. Wet, creaking boards, rising and falling under invisible waves. I was standing on a ship. The fog stretched into a horizon of nothing, the sea black and endless. The light from the tower still rotated, but it was far away now, a distant heartbeat. The woman stood on the deck in front of me, her dress whipping in wind that didn't touch my skin. "You built this," she said. "You made it real. You brought the light to him." I turned. There was a hatch, open, leading below deck. I could hear something inside. Crying. The voice of a child, echoing up through wood and water. Every instinct I had screamed run, but my legs didn't listen. The smell of salt was sharp and fresh now, not rot, but renewal. I stepped toward the hatch. The woman followed silently behind me, her feet not touching the boards. The ladder descended into black water, but the crying was louder there, clearer. "Mama." My chest cracked open. I don't have children, but that sound, it's built into the species. You can't hear it and stay whole. I climbed down until the water touched my boots. Something moved beneath the surface, slow, small, circling. When I reached my hand in, it was warm. Not sea warm, blood warm. A ripple spread, and from beneath, the boy appeared. Not decayed, not skeletal, just still. Pale skin like milk, hair floating around his face. His eyes were open. He wasn't afraid. He reached for me. The moment our fingers touched, light exploded. Bright, white, silent. The water vanished. The ship was gone. The wind stopped. I was kneeling on solid rock again, the rope limp beside me. The woman stood near the cliff's edge, holding the child in her arms. His small hands clutched her dress. She looked down at him and smiled with a kind of peace that doesn't belong in this world. Then both of them began to fade. First the edges of the dress, then her arms, then the faint glow of their outlines. The last thing I saw was her face lifting toward the lighthouse, her lips shaping one word: home. The fog rolled back in, covering everything. The horn blared once, loud enough to shake the cliff. When it cleared, I was alone. The toy boat sat at my feet, perfectly dry. The twine was gone. I carried it back to the tower without thinking. At the top, I placed it beside the logbook and turned on the main light again. The beam swept across the black, strong and unbroken. No more stutter. No more blink. At 3:11 a.m., the wind dropped, and for a second, I heard a faint laugh through the glass. High, soft, distant, then nothing. The ocean exhaled, and the night moved on. The night after it happened, the air felt wrong. The lighthouse was too quiet, the waves too even, the machinery too smooth. It was the kind of silence that feels like someone holding their breath behind a door. I stayed in the lantern room watching the beam crawl across the sea until dawn bruised the sky. By morning, I convinced myself I'd hallucinated it. Long shifts, low light, bad sleep. Men see worse on oil rigs and at war. But when I went down to make coffee, the toy boat was gone. Not misplaced, not fallen. Gone. In its place on the logbook was a smear of salt in the shape of a handprint. Small. About the size of a child's. The next few days passed quietly. Tourists came for the weekend, took their photos, laughed at the stories about the gray lady. I told the same old script. Caretaker's wife, lost child, light that never dies. But something in the air had shifted. The foghorn sounded richer. The beam ran without a hiccup. For the first time in months, the tower felt clean, alive. And then, on my last night before transfer, she came back. It was around 2 a.m. The sea was calm, glassy, reflecting the beam like a vein of silver cutting through the dark. I was sitting at the desk writing my final report when the temperature dropped so fast the ink froze mid-sentence. The foghorn groaned once, and low, sorrowful, and then stopped. I didn't need to turn around. I knew the smell. Salt, smoke, and that faint sweetness of violets. Only now it carried the faintest note of driftwood. "Mrs. Mercer," I said quietly. "You got him home." "Yes," she said, her voice right behind me. I turned slowly. She stood near the lens, the boy beside her. Both of them faint. Not transparent, just thinned, like light seen through water. He clutched the hem of her dress, smiling in a way only children who've forgotten fear can. She looked the same as before, but softer. Her eyes held the same exhaustion I see in men who've finally stopped fighting sleep. "I thought you'd gone," I said. "I tried," she whispered. "But the light called us back." I frowned. "The light?" Her gaze turned toward the great glass lens. "It was his beacon. It still is. We keep it burning." I stepped closer, careful not to break whatever thin thread kept her here. "Why show me?" "Because you saw us," she said simply. "Because the living forget too quickly." The boy tugged her sleeve. "Mama," he said. "It's coming." Her face tightened, not fear, not pain. More like recognition. She looked back at me one last time. "Tell them we're still watching. Tell them the sea remembers." And then the beam flared, blinding. I threw my arm up to shield my eyes. When the light dimmed again, they were gone. But something else had changed. The lens from that perfect ancient circle of glass had a crack. Fine, hair-thin, running from the center outward like the line of a tear. I radioed the Coast Guard that morning. They logged it as thermal stress from sudden temperature change. I didn't correct them. They sent a crew 2 days later to replace the pane, but when they disassembled the lens, they found something sealed behind one of the brass fittings. A photograph. It was faded, warped by moisture, but clear enough to make out. A man in a keeper's uniform, A woman in a pale dress and a little boy standing between them, clutching a carved wooden boat. The back of the photo had a date, 1893, and a single word written in elegant cursive. Home. I still have that picture. I keep it in my jacket pocket, folded tight so it doesn't catch the light. Some nights, when I can't sleep, I drive back down the coast just to see the beam sweep across the black. It's steady now. No flicker, no skip. But every 7 rotations there's a flash brighter than the rest. Too quick for the eye, but bright enough to catch in a camera frame. If you slow it down, freeze that moment, you can see 2 figures in the reflection. A woman in a long pale dress, holding a child by the hand. They're standing where the sea ends and the light begins. And sometimes, if the wind hits the rocks just right, you can hear the faintest sound beneath the foghorn. A woman humming a lullaby no one's sung in 100 years. That's how I know they're still here. Not haunting, not warning, keeping the light. I work nights because day shift is too loud with living excuses. Nights the noise is honest. Radiator clicks, distant elevator cable singing to itself. The rubber hush of my soles on polished linoleum. I do rounds on the old wing we call heritage, which is the nice word for corridors the state forgot to budget feelings for. People ask if I'm scared to be alone in a psychiatric hospital after midnight. I tell them the truth. I'm only scared when the living stop sounding like themselves. The record room is my favorite place to hide between rounds. A locked archive behind a green door that sticks and stacked with boxes that smell like paper rot and lemon oil. Stamped dates back to the 1890s. Handwritten notes in a dozen different hands that learned to press hard to be believed. You can feel time in there, not the ticking kind, the sediment kind. I used to read admissions from a century ago while the fluorescent light hummed a headache into the ceiling. Female. Melancholia, male shell shock, no child. Incorrigible. The words bruise even when nobody means them to. On the night it started, the boiler overcompensated for cold. The radiators hissed like snakes pretending to be tea kettles, and the hallway outside smelled faintly of hot dust and something sweeter underneath, like cough syrup poured into a glove. I swiped my badge at Heritage's fire door, pushed through, and the air on the other side had that stillness that tells you a building is listening. Rounds are ritual. Check the red lights over doors, peer through the panes, count chests rising under thin blankets, whisper first names that don't belong to me. Room 12, breathing okay. Room 14, turned on side. Room 16, eyes open, staring past me at a corner I don't want to look at. You good, Mr. Lang? He blinked, slow as a lighthouse in fog, and said, "Don't you hear them scraping?" I smiled the way they teach you, gentle and bland. "Just the heat," I said, and his eyes slid off me like I was a window. At the end of the corridor is the day room nobody uses at night. 2 couches that know more tears than television, a dead vending machine, a bulletin board with curling announcements for groups that never meet on time. There's a locked door off the day room marked morgue in letters that got smaller every time they painted over them. We don't store anything there now. That's what I've been told. That's what I tell the new hires when they ask why the lock sometimes feels warm. I went into the day room to breathe. The clock on the wall said 2:37, which is the part of the night when even the brave start lying to themselves. The reflection in the window was mine until the light flickered, and then someone else joined me in the glass. A boy standing just behind my left shoulder. Small shaved head the way they used to do it. Hospital gown too big, collarbones like parentheses. He didn't move. He didn't fog the glass. He just existed in the reflection where I wasn't. I turned around fast enough for the room to swim. Nothing there. Cushions remembered bodies that weren't seated. The vending machine hummed an apology. I looked back at the window and the boy was still in the glass, closer now. Expression set in the kind of seriousness kids wear when they're trying hard not to cry. "Hey," I said to the empty room, and my voice came out wrong, like it was coming through a speaker in a different hallway. "You lost?" The clock ticked once and stopped. The air changed temperature around my ankles. that subtle sink of cold like a door opening a floor below you. From down the corridor something scraped. Not metal, chalk. A slow line shearing itself across slate. My scalp tightened. The Heritage Wing has no chalkboards anymore. They pulled them out with the asbestos, left smooth painted walls that reflect fluorescent misery. I walk toward the sound because that's what they pay me to do. Head into the thing, pretend the thing is a maintenance issue. Room 10's observation glass was fogged from inside. It shouldn't have been. The rooms are dry as old bread. I wiped a circle with my sleeve and my stomach went gluey. The bed was empty, sheets smooth as if they'd been ironed by a careful ghost. On the far wall, a rectangle darker than paint, the exact proportions of a blackboard that hadn't existed for 50 years. Lines bloomed on that darkness as I watched, powder white strokes appearing with no hand to make them. They formed letters that were not quite a child's and not quite a doctor's. A word, then another. I read them aloud because sometimes saying it makes it less true. "Tell her I'm cold," I said, and my breath ghosted the glass. Behind me, the boy's reflection in the window was nodding. I unlocked the door with a hand that didn't feel like mine. The room had the smell of old metal and wet songbooks. The bed's metal rails ticked as if cooling after being heated in someone's mouth. Up close, the shadow board on the wall wasn't a shadow at all. It was the ghost of adhesives and paint layers, the memory of where something had been. The writing was chalk dust that wasn't there when I touched it, but it smeared anyway, gray on my fingers. "Tell who?" I asked, and the room's temperature felt like an elevator cut loose from its rope. The answer came from the vent above the bed, a breath pushed through tin lungs. "Mother," it said, simple as a diagnosis. Then a rattle like marbles in a jar, like teeth that stayed to chatter after the jaw left. I backed into the hallway with the professionalism of a man who wants to run without the security camera catching it. Radio clipped to my shoulder. I pressed the talk button and nothing spoke back. Not static, not dead air. Just a soft, steady tapping. 323. I knew that rhythm from boiler nights. I also knew it from hands on glass. The morgue door clicked. Not opened. Clicked. The delicate sound a lock makes when it changes its mind. I wish I could tell you I left it. That I logged a call to maintenance for a misbehaving latch and kept moving. I put my palm on that door like it had a pulse. Warm. Not metaphor warm. Skin warm. I swiped my badge and the panel lit green like it was glad to see me. Inside smelled like winter behind a church. Tile floor too clean for a room nobody uses. The stainless gurney, the drawers. The inadequate sink where cold water pretends it can rinse a life away. Somebody had left a folded sheet on the counter. I say somebody because it's easier than saying the sheet folded itself while I watched. Set on top was a tag, blank except for a single penciled word. Returned. It should have meant pathology paperwork. A mistake, a prank. It meant none of those things in the temperature my bones were keeping. The overhead fixture flickered once, twice, and then steadied into a light that didn't belong to this century. The kind of light that remembers gas. The walls sweated a little. My breath did not. From one of the drawers came that chalk sound again. Only closer, only wetter, like a finger writing on glass underwater. "Okay," I said, because that's my trick when fear climbs my throat. Make it a conversation. "Okay, I'm here." The drawer handle slid without my hand. Steel whispering steel. It opened 4 inches, then 6. Then all the way, polite as a waiter. Inside, the slab was empty. But frost traced a sentence along the metal. Beads forming at each curve and then freezing into words. She never said goodbye. I didn't notice the boy until he was standing on the other side of the gurney, where there wasn't room for him to stand because there wasn't room for anyone to stand. He didn't look at me. He looked at the tag. He lifted a finger and pushed it toward me across the sheet. The motion of a kid offering you his last marble. When it touched my skin, the pencil line darkened, letters rising from faint to legible like bruises. A name wrote itself in small, careful script. Not his, hers. I knew it before I read it. I'd seen it 1,000 times in the archive on envelopes that were never opened. The light went out. The warm lock clicked back to cold. From somewhere in Heritage, a woman screamed like she was finally allowed to. The scream traveled the way terror does in these halls, through metal and ductwork first, then into the bones of whoever's listening. It dragged me down Heritage like I was leashed to it. Doors stayed closed. Observation panes reflected nothing I wanted to see. When I hit the day room, the sound had already burned itself out, leaving the air thin and quivering. The vending machine light strobed once and steadied. The clock resumed ticking like a throat clearing after a lie. "Hello?" I said, because procedure says announce yourself and because silence is a kind of permission here. No answer, only that syrup-sweet smell again, undercut now by cold metal. Room 16's nightlight glowed crooked under the door, a little diagonal bruise. Mr. Lang lay turned to the wall, breathing slow, his eyes open to some other schedule. "You okay?" I asked. He blinked. A second passed and the blink finished. "She's here for the small one," he murmured. "Don't make her wait." His voice didn't belong to him. It belonged to a room no one let him enter. I backed out and swallowed the urge to say a prayer I hadn't used since my grandmother's rosary. The record room key was in my pocket before I decided to need it. Green door. Stick of the hinge. Lemon oil and paper rot breathed me in. I went straight to the shelf that shouldn't have had anything to do with kids. Admissions, juvenile, 1900-1925. The box was heavier than it looked. Inside, file jackets the color of old tea and a stack of envelopes bound with string. The top jacket broke my name like a whispered dare. Ellison Thomas, age 9. Admitted for incorrigible, destitute, vagrant. The words bruised even after a century. I opened it. A photograph paperclipped to the first sheet. A boy with a shaved head under a cap that didn't fit. Eyes set to watch for exits. The admission note in ink that leaned too hard. Found sleeping in freight yard. Mother unlocated. Then later, mother located. Visitation denied per Dr. H. Patient displays cold intolerance. Prescribed open-air regimen. Cold intolerance. In this place. Someone had underlined it once so hard the paper tore. The envelopes were all addressed in a tidy hand that tried to stay hopeful. Mrs. Ruth Ellison, to Master Thomas Ellison, C.O. Oregon State Hospital. None had been opened. On each a stamp returned to sender, unclaimed deceased on the last one. Another hand had added a single word in pencil. Sorry. The floor under me moved a fraction. The way a building sighs after a long day of pretending it's not holding anything it can't let go of. From somewhere close, the vent, the corridor, my own chest, the chalk scrape sound returned, slow and patient. Tell her I'm cold, he'd written. The frost on the morgue slab had asked for goodbye. The tag had spelled her name before the dark took it back. I took the top letter. The paper inside felt like skin left too long in winter. I didn't read it yet. Every instinct said I needed to. A different instinct said I shouldn't in here. I slid the letter into my jacket, retied the string on the wrist, and shut the box before the room could change its mind about letting it go. The corridor had grown a new corridor in the time. I'd been inside, perspective bending the way it does when you've been staring at one thing too long and suddenly remember, your body has to move through space. Heritage can do that. Make straight lines kink, stretch distances. The morgue door waited at the end, not ominous, just inevitable. My badge beeped green without me swiping it. Inside, the stainless gleamed too bright, every reflection a second late. The drawer I'd opened before had its lip out like a mouth refusing to close until it's told what it wants to hear. On the gurney, the folded sheet and the tag. The tag no longer blank. The name had settled in, graphite dark, Ruth Ellison. Someone had drawn a line under it as if to keep it from slipping away again. I brought one, I said. My voice shook like a fluorescent bulb trying to decide whether to hum. I took the letter out and set it on the steel. The paper left a rectangle of breath on the metal, fogging and unfogging as if reading itself. I don't know why I apologized to a century. I'm sorry, I said to the drawer, to the boy, to the woman who had been denied the only kindness any animal understands. I'm sorry they didn't let you see him. I'm sorry it was cold. A pressure gathered behind me, familiar as a hand at the small of the back to guide you across a busy street. In the pitted reflection of the gurney, I watched the room receive two new shapes. The boy first close, his head not quite making it to the edge of the slab in the mirror's wrong geometry. Behind him, a woman whose posture had learned how to carry grief like a bundle she had no right to set down. She didn't blur like the others. She sharpened as if the air had finally agreed to define her. You can open it, I said, and immediately hated how small that sounded. If you want. Her hand, thin, all tendons and will, reached. The envelope lifted without touching. The string came loose with the sound of hair leaving a comb, and the single sheet unfolded. The ink hadn't faded. Words crowded the page, phrases revised and rewritten until compassion bled through the paper. Tommy, they wouldn't let me see you. Tommy, I brought your sweater. Tommy, I'm waiting every Sunday at the gate. If they call for me, I'll run. The boy leaned over the letter like heat learning to read. I was cold, he said, not accusing this time. Not writing it on walls. Reporting it. The way patients report pain on a 10-point scale, because that's the only scale a system understands. I know, she whispered, a sound stitched out of needles and patience. I am here. The light over the sink flared. The frost on the gurney bloomed into a map of rivers. The tag slid an inch all by itself and turned face down like a hand deciding to finally cover a body's eyes. I thought that would be it. The Hollywood mercy of a goodbye arriving 100 years late. It wasn't. The drawer that had opened itself during part 1 groaned and settled 2 inches lower, as if accepting weight the rest of the room couldn't see. The boy climbed without climbing. The sheet lifted and fell, the way air does when it's reminded what lungs used to do inside it. The woman bent over him, and the sound she made wasn't a cry. It was the exhale of an animal finally allowed to stop bracing. Something cold touched the inside of my wrist. Small. The size of a hand that learned to hold without taking. I didn't look down. I knew if I did, there'd be nothing to see, and the seeing would break whatever was happening. Can you tell him I'm here? She asked me, and the absurdity of being asked to mediate between the dead and the dead nearly undid me. He knows, I said. He always knew. He's been trying to say it all night. The overhead fixture clicked once, twice, 3 times, and then gave itself to a soft, steady light that belonged to no wattage I could list. The sheet settled. The chrome returned to being reflective instead of prophetic. When I finally looked at my wrist, there was a wet circle where the cold had pressed skin. A perfect coin of frost melting into a brighter patch like a healed place on old fruit. In the reflection, the boy had gone. The woman hadn't. She stood at the end of the gurney, not looking at me, reading the letter again with the kind of attention that changes the thing being seen. The last line stopped her. I knew it because I could feel the air around us lean forward. It wasn't signed with love. It wasn't signed at all. The page simply ended after a sentence that fell off like a breath cut short. The morgue's other drawers hummed like hive boxes in winter. The walls sweated less. The clock out in the day room tried to tick and failed. The woman lifted her head, not toward me, toward the vent. Goodbye, Tommy, she said, speaking the word the letter had not. And the vent answered with a small, traveled echo that softened itself into yes. The temperature rose 2 degrees. The tag curled at one corner. From the corridor, a wheel squeaked. The housekeeping cart making rounds it wasn't scheduled to run. I turned toward the door because the living always knock after the dead leave, if only to confuse your story in the incident report. When I looked back, the letter had folded itself and pressed flat as if ironed. The tag lay face up again. The name wasn't Ruth anymore. It was mine. The badge reader outside the morgue beeped red without being touched. The lock clicked into a position I hadn't heard it used before. On the other side of the door, someone whispered my first name through the seam, like a mother trying not to wake the ward. The seam breathed my name a second time, softer, like it had leaned close enough to fog the paint. I didn't answer. I put my palm to the metal and felt a pulse that wasn't mine working through the door. The badge light held red, steady as a decision. The morgue, which had just learned mercy, wanted me to stay and label it. "Not tonight," I said, and my own voice came back smaller. I eased the handle anyway. It gave with the reluctance of a jaw unclenching. The corridor outside had shortened again. Heritage playing tricks with distance so that the day room felt only a few breaths away. The clock there had stopped at 3:03. In the window, my reflection stood where it should, but the boy wasn't behind me anymore. Instead, a smear of gray low to the floor, the shape a draft makes when it teaches itself to be child-sized. The vending machine hummed. The glass in its front showed my face with the kind of delay you only see in bad video calls in haunted buildings. When it finally caught up, it added something that shouldn't have been there. A toe tag swinging from my ear like a joke in a cruel ward. I reached up. My fingers found nothing. In the glass, the tag kept swaying. I looked down. The tag I'd left on the gurney was gone. "Okay," I told the hallway, the vents, the record room, the dead metal of the elevator shafts. "If you want me, say it. Don't write it on me." A door halfway down, room 10, sighed open an inch as if humoring me. Inside, the blackboard that wasn't had changed. No chalk lines this time, just fog. It was moving with purpose, drawing itself in inhalations and exhalations until it formed a rectangle the size of a door in the wrong wall. The slab looked like winter water. I could see currents in it. Faces rose and fell in the fog. Old men, girls, a nurse, a warder with a badge from a time before passwords. They didn't linger. They were the kind of faces a building accumulates. I stepped closer and the temperature dropped so fast my teeth hurt. The tag tapped my sternum then. Light, no weight, impossible, and when I caught it, the pencil marks had changed. Not my name. Not Ruth's, a list. Names I'd skimmed in the archive until my eyes went numb. Venable, Hart, Missy Lane, Thomas Ellison. Next to each a date and one word returned. The fog door rippled. A silhouette stepped forward on the other side. A woman's outline I knew now by posture alone. Not Ruth, someone older, narrower, corseted by duty. She raised her hand to the surface and pressed. A palm print bloomed cold on my side of the fog. I set my hand against it because there are gestures that empty you before you can think how not to perform them. Her mouth moved. No sound came through, but the vent above the bed translated in a voice made of air pushed through a reed. "When they deny the body, they keep the ghost. Give them back what was taken. Letters." That's what she meant. Not one, all of them. Not a haunting. A backlog. The record room key bit my fingers without drawing blood. I ran. The green door resisted like it always does and then let me through fast as if embarrassed by the delay. Boxes waited with patient cruelty. Juvenile, women's, indigent, war. In the top left of the juvenile shelf, under the soot of a century of breath, a carton notched by thumbnails. I pulled it and something inside rattled like old bones. Envelopes, dozens, maybe 100, all in hands that wrote carefully because someone would judge the penmanship instead of the pain. I carried the weight the way you carry a child when you haven't done it in a while, awkward and reverent. In the day room, I laid them on the table. No ritual, no salt, just paper and intention. "We'll do it together," I said, because talking makes time thinner and I needed time thin enough to move through. I opened the first. "Dearest Frankie, I knitted the scarf orange because it's the color you like." The knitted scarf smell rose out of paper that had no right to keep it. I set it on the windowsill. The next. "To my sister Maggie, I forgive you." The next. "To Mr. Arthur B., you are not crazy." The next. "Tommy, the sweater." The stack made a line along the sill like mail waiting for a train that finally came. As each envelope opened, the building exhaled a little more. The stopped clock ticked once. The radiator hiss lost its snake. The hallway unkinked by a foot. I read, not all the words, only enough to make the living voice real again. I didn't sign on their behalf, didn't apologize for men I never met. I said their names. That was the work. Names like scores settling into silence. At the 50th letter, the dayroom TV flickered onto static and then to snow and then to a channel that hasn't existed since this place had attendants instead of techs. I saw the ward from 1912, steel beds and white uniforms, and a nurse bend to tuck a boy who didn't know how to let the tuck hold. The picture held a second and was gone. In its place, my reflection, and the toe tag in the glass was blank again. When I opened the last envelope, I didn't need to read. The paper remembered my hands from minutes ago. Ruth's careful script. The unspoken goodbye. I finished it aloud because endings are a living person's job. "Goodbye, Tommy," I said, and the word didn't catch in my throat this time. It left me and did what it had to do. The fog door in room 10 quivered like a surface tension broken by a fingertip. The rectangle thinned. Faces let go. The cold lifted from my bones so gently it felt like hands taking a weight I hadn't known I carried. Something small touched my knee. I looked down and saw nothing. I looked at the window and saw the boy in the glass standing beside a woman whose shoulders were no longer an effort. They didn't wave. They didn't need to. They turned and walked toward the part of the reflection that didn't reflect anything. It brightened where they went. The tag in my hand warmed. The pencil lifted without lifting, graphite brightening into a new name. Mine again. Below it a date. Tonight my stomach dropped into the floor. "No," I said, to the room, to the building, to whatever ledger had decided my column. "You got what you wanted," the vent answered in the reed voice. "Balance. I gave you yours," I said. "Give me mine." The badge reader at the fire door blinked from red to amber. That's a code we only get during drills. I don't know who pulled it. Maybe no one did. Maybe the building decided not to keep me because I kept my part. The lock released. Somewhere beyond Heritage, a night nurse laughed at a joke in the real world. On my way out, I took the box of letters I hadn't opened and handed it to the switch nurse with instructions I had no authority to give. "Find families if you can," I said. "If not, read them aloud. Names first." She looked at my face, whatever was left of it. She didn't argue. Outside, the air carried wet dirt and distant highway. I sat on the curb under a streetlight that made moths into slow sparks and called my mother. It rang long enough for me to consider the end of everything. When she answered, her voice was older than I remembered, and the softest thing I'd heard all night. I didn't say the hospital's name or the word heritage or morgue. I said, "I'm here," and waited for the line between us to warm. She said, "I know," and we did the easiest, hardest thing. We stayed. When I hung up, the toe tag lay on the concrete by my shoe. Blank. The pencil marks had vanished into the paper, as if the page had learned erasure for itself. I left it there. In the morning, a groundsman swept it into a bag with leaves and cigarette filters and the candy wrappers the living shed when they get to walk out under their own sky. Later, in the record room, a new file jacket appeared where no one could have filed it. My name on the tab. Inside, a single sheet with 2 typed words, "Released warm." I think about the boy less now. When I do, he isn't cold. That's enough. But when I pass the green door on my rounds, I still hear chalk where no chalk is. Writing a single word because sometimes even the dead want to be obvious. Thanks. I took the overnight desk in Waldo Hall because the stipend covered 1 more month of rent, and because the building at night felt like a thesis no one had finished. On tours, they talk about the Queen Anne lines and the red brick and how it used to be a women's dorm before it became offices and the counseling center. They don't talk about the sealed 4th floor, or the window that's always dark until it isn't, or the way footsteps can sound like they're walking on the back of your neck. I'm a grad student in history. I tell myself that means I like old things. I didn't know old could like me back. Midterms had eaten the campus. Even the drunk voices outside were quiet. Just tired kids shuffling between libraries and beds they'd forget to make. The front doors of Waldo breathed me in at 11:54. I signed the log, the same blue pen, the same stale coffee smell woven into the desk wood. The security lights laid a thin milk over the hall, and the stairwell at the east end wore its shadow like a hood. On the wall behind me, the oil portrait of some long-dead benefactor shone with the kind of varnish that eats faces. In the glass doors I could see both of us, me and the painting, and a third shape that wasn't there when I turned around. My shift was simple: answer the phone if it rang, let facilities in if the alarms blinked, walk around on the hour, look official if a student cried. I did my first round at midnight, the building's bones popping as they traded the day's heat for night's rumor. The counseling wing slept like something that had finally exhausted itself. Closed office doors wore little placards with names that sounded human and weary. The whisper of ventilation said, "We can take this air and make it behave." On the landing to the third floor, a draft rose that didn't belong to any vent. It felt like someone had just run up the steps past me and didn't want me to notice. Waldo's fourth floor is sealed. There's an alarm box and a strip of metal where a lock once lived, and a painted-over sign that used to say attic. I don't know when they closed it. Everyone has a story. Fire code, bats. A student who went up and came down, changed enough to need a new major. That night I had no story. I only had the sound the building made above me, a tiny click like a woman's tongue against her teeth when she's thinking. Back at the desk, I opened my laptop and tried to beat a paragraph into submission. The sentence kept slipping. In the upper corner of the monitor, the camera indicator flickered once. It shouldn't have. The camera was taped. The little tier of black electrical tape lay curled on the keyboard like a shed skin. The indicator glowed steady green, and for a second the screen showed the faintest overlay. Not my face reflected in glass, but a high window looking over campus. Dark trees curled like fists, a reflection of someone standing behind the lens. Then it went back to Word like nothing had happened. I told myself power glitch because naming things keeps them from multiplying. I put the tape back, hard enough to make it stick to tomorrow. The desk phone rang once and stopped. The elevator gave a tired sigh, even though it was parked and locked at the ground floor. I wrote it all down in the log like a good employee. 1221, minor electrical anomalies. The line looked small. It looked like a dare. At 1:03 I did the second round. The stairwell felt narrower, the banister oil slick with a history of hands. On 2, the copy room door was ajar. It had been closed. In the bluish light, paper dust hung like planets. The copier hummed the low animal hum machines make when they dream of fire. On the glass, a sheet lay face down. I lifted the lid and turned it over. It wasn't a document from tonight. It wasn't anything from this century. The paper had browned at the edges, brittle enough that my fingers hesitated. Handwriting in a tight, ashamed script. Request for room change. Reason: disturbances at night. The line below had been crossed out and rewritten 3 times until the words pushed like a bruise through the page. A final version remained. Someone keeps standing by my bed. She doesn't blink. The date at the top said 1911. The copier's display blinked ready. The lid closed by itself, gently, like a hand tucking a child. When I lifted it again, the glass was empty. The sheet in my hand was clean, fresh white, today's stock, no writing, nothing at all. I held it to the light like a fool. The fibers told me nothing. I put it back, shut the door, and told the hallway out loud. Not funny. Waldo's ceiling pipes clicked twice, a sound that could have been laughter if laughter wore nails. On the way down, I passed the window at the landing that faces the quad. The glass showed me what glass should. The dark lawn, the orange halo over the library, a campus that had rolled onto its side. And in the top left pane, a second picture laid itself over the first. The upper window, the one in the sealed floor. It was dark until it wasn't. For a breath, a lamp burned there. The shade cast a trapezoid of yellow. A woman stood inside it. I couldn't see her face, only her posture. A little forward tilt, like she'd been listening to a door for so long that she'd become the hinge. She turned as if she'd heard me see her. The light went out. I ran the rest of the stairs without admitting that I was running. Back at the desk, the portrait's eyes had learned a new trick. They weren't following me. They were looking up toward the ceiling, toward the sealed door that wasn't in their room to look at. The phone rang again, and this time I grabbed it like it mattered. No voice, just a soft breath and the lightest scrape like a nail over paint. Slow, considered, not meant to frighten, meant to measure. "Waldo Hall desk," I said, too bright. "The way you talk to someone who's crying and you're not allowed to make it about you." The scrape stopped. The breath didn't. I waited. My heartbeat made a shape around my throat it hadn't made since a car spun toward me freshman year, and stopped with an inch of hood keeping my ribcage from being history. "Do you need help?" I asked, and immediately wanted to bite the words back. Because in old buildings there are questions that are really invitations, and I didn't want to invite anything I couldn't send home. A woman's voice answered, not a whisper, not a moan. Firm, taught by years of telling girls to sign in on time. "I am watching," she said. "Are you?" The line clicked dead. The elevator shuddered like a sleeper turning over. And somewhere above me, where the fourth floor wasn't, a key slid into a lock that the building still remembered. The key sound overhead kept working at me after the phone clicked off, like a syllable you can't place. I stood up so fast the chair rolled back and tapped the wall. A small knock that sounded answered. The alarm panel by the stairwell glowed a harmless little green that meant everything was fine. It wasn't. A red LED beside attic fourth pulsed once, then steadied the way a heartbeat does after deciding to live. I took the master ring from the desk. Flat brass keys. A few card fobs, one ancient skeleton key someone kept for nostalgia, and started for the east stairs. The portrait's varnish caught my face and pared it down to eyes and a mouth. The eyes were mine. The mouth wasn't. It was held in a patience learned from counting doors. The stairwell was colder. On the third floor landing, that wrong draft rose again, the kind of air that knows a path no architect planned. The fourth floor door was painted the same dull institutional cream, but the paint had learned to fail different. A vertical seam traced the jamb, hairline like the building had been holding its breath there for decades. The alarm box above it read bypass, though no one had the code. "Don't," I told myself, and put the skeleton key in the old lock. It turned with the sound of dry bones greeting each other. The door breathed outward and a smell rolled over me that was part starch, part chalk, part the soft animal heat of too many people asleep in one place. The corridor beyond wasn't long so much as careful. Narrow, with doors set close together, each with a transom sealed by paint heavy as frosting. A single lamp hung at the far end, not lit, but everything under it carried a shape the dark had learned to remember. The floorboards complained with little knife squeaks as I stepped. On the right, a corkboard, the original kind with real cork and tacks like black eyes, held notices that had outlived their ink. Lights out 10:30. Quiet hours strictly enforced. No men beyond the parlor. Report all disturbances to matron on duty. The matron had signed with a perfect cursive I recognized without ever having seen. A hand that didn't forgive sloppiness because sloppiness burns. I didn't have to wonder which room had belonged to her. The air knew. Midway down, a door felt colder than its neighbors. The placard above it had lost its numbers long ago, but a shadow of them remained. 414. When I reached for the knob, something brushed past me at thigh height and my knee bent like it wanted to make space for a child. I stepped back. The knob turned without my skin. The door opened a hand's width and no more. Inside, the dark had arranged itself into furniture. A narrow bed with a chenille spread. A small desk with a blotter and a lamp that never did like to go off. A wardrobe with a mirror that showed nothing except the memory of uniforms. And on the desk a ledger the exact tan of old envelope glue. It lay open, pages swelling from time, pen resting where a hand had set it down and never picked it back up. I don't know why I whispered when I read. The words were meant to be public. Accounting for a night is always public. 10:45, girls in 4I-20 whispering. Knocked 11:15, window in 407 open. Corrected. 12 gang, Mr. F much too forward at desk. Turned away. Chores 3, footsteps in hall. Not ours. 117 stood at beds. Chores into, no blinking. The ink had darkened where the nib paused. The line below was dated in a hand that had learned neatness as a way to contain fear. 2:30, Aaron stares wrong. 2:41, are you watching? The pen lifted on its own and pricked the paper once, a dot of wet black. It didn't write more. It didn't have to. I heard her in the hall, that home-syllable footfall, the measured cadence of someone who makes rounds until rounds become her. I went back out and she was there at the corridor's end, not appearing so much as resolving like an image in a tray when the developer knows what it's doing. A long skirt the color of the building's thoughts. Hair pinned in a way that turned the head into a tool. No face at first, then just enough. Cheekbones pale with duty, mouth set against kindness because rules keep more girls alive than does mercy. Sign in, she said, a voice not angry. Unimpressed, it braided into the corridor like a rule written in air. At the desk, I said, because there are habits you can't unlearn even when talking to the dead. She nodded once and I wasn't meant to thank her. I was meant to obey. So I went back to the ledger and wrote my name where the night had space for it. The pen warmer in my hand than ink has any right to be. A sound took the air then. A fan belt whine drawn tight with worry. The elevator, locked on one, moved by itself. It thumped where no elevator should. The sealed transoms above 2 doors shivered, catching light where there was none. Somewhere below me, faint as guilt, a smoke detector chirped. A single bird note that didn't repeat. I froze because I knew that chirp. The battery cry you ignore until it becomes part of the room. Another chirp, not from the 4th floor. From 3, from the counseling center. She was already looking down the stairwell, not at me, at the seam where air climbs. Her hand lifted, wrist bone sharp under skin that learned to live in soap and water. She pointed, no drama, no ghost theatrics, past me and down. What is it? I asked. Stupid for the 2nd time tonight because I already knew. Heat, she said, and a cord under a rug. The building translated then. A hint of warm dust at the back of my throat. The sort of thin haze light makes when it meets particulate. A single low beep from the alarm panel far away where it couldn't help. I ran because all my snotty grad student heft belongs to the living when it counts. 3rd floor. Counseling. Door cracked when it should have been latched. Inside, a lamp glowed on the carpet beside a couch. Its shade knocked and listing like a small drunk. An electric space heater the size of a cake sat by a baseboard. The orange coils not hot yet but wanting to be. The extension cord snaked under a throw rug until a chair leg crushed it at a dumb angle. On the couch, a student slept the kind of sleep that isn't rest. Her fist was closed around tissues inked with the shape of crying. Hey, I said, too loud, and the shame of it landed in the room like a shoe. Hey, you can't. She startled, not all the way awake, turned a face that could have been anyone's face the year after 19, and tried to explain before she knew what to explain for. The way you do when you've been taught to apologize as a reflex. It's okay, I said softer. I unplugged the heater. I unwound the cord. I righted the shade and set the lamp high. I pulled the rug back like it had teeth. You're fine. Go home, okay, or wait. I'll call the on-call counselor. But not like this. Her mouth worked around a thank you that tried to grow. She nodded in pieces. I walked her to the door and watched her through the hall camera until the building. Swallowed her with the gentleness of a campus at 2 a.m. deciding it will mercifully not be the last place you ever see. Back in the counseling room, the air had lost its warm dust thought. The panel on the hall quit its nervous beep. I stood there longer than I needed to, palms flat on my thighs, hearing my blood decide to stand down. When I looked up, the window glass held an extra thing again. The 4th floor lamp, burning for one blink in its impossible room, and a woman by it, making a note in the ledger of a building that is herself. I went back upstairs. The door to the sealed hall stood open a few inches. just enough to admit a lesson. The ledger page I had signed had grown a line under my name. Not in my hand, in hers. 258, girl safe. Cord corrected. Keeper reminded. I didn't tell her I wasn't the keeper. That wasn't the point. The lamp at the end of the hall sent its shape down the corridor like a long thought. The matron turned her head then, as if at last I had earned the right to be seen, and I saw her eyes for what they were. Tired, yes. Stern, yes. But also the kind of blue that looks black at night. A color that watches because watching is the only power some women are permitted. You don't blink, I said. And the stupid in it felt like truth. I can't, she said. It begins when we do. Behind her, somewhere in the sealed dark, a door latch lifted by itself and set back down like a change of mind. She watched me like a clock. I felt the planet turn an inch. From below, faint but real, the desk phone rang once. Go, she said. Not a dismissal. A schedule. My feet had already learned the stairs. I took them like a student late for a test. On the second ring I picked up, mouth already open to say Waldo Hall. The line carried breathing and a tiny, measured scrape, the sound of a pencil sitting down to work. Are you watching? The voice asked, and for the first time I heard the tremor in it. Not fear? Fatigue? Yes, I said before the word could learn to be a promise I couldn't keep. I'm watching. The light above the desk swelled, then settled. The portrait stared dead center now, unbothered with ceilings. The alarm panel returned to harmless green. Somewhere, a woman in a century that never had my name wrote my name anyway and drew a small check beside it. The fourth-floor door clicked softly, sealing a quiet that felt earned. The phone line didn't disconnect. It waited, breathing. I didn't speak. The line breathed like it had lungs, slow, measured as if matching my chest to teach me a pace. When I finally said hello, the building answered me back through the handset with its small languages. A relay clicking, a pipe deciding, the soft brush of a cord against a desk. Then a second voice arrived under the first, a whisper with shape. Downstairs, she said. Front doors. I went, the handset still at my ear, the coil taut between shoulder and mouth. At the lobby, the glass showed me and the portrait and the night beyond. The left door stood latched, the right had not caught. Only a finger's width of failure, the kind of almost that lets the wrong weather in. A sliver of cold pressed against my shin. The sensor had missed it. The alarm panel kept its pleasant green. But the hinge sighed in that human way that means someone passed through without asking. The campus outside was empty in the way only 2 a.m. can be. A big breath between semesters. The lamp over the steps carved a little chapel of light into the fog. It felt like standing in a bell. Far across the quad, a shadow moved. Not a student's shape. Too still at the edges, like a stain deciding whether to be a person. The handset hissed once and quieted. Who's there? I said, because that's what you say when you don't want to say what you're thinking. The figure didn't turn. It held its place just beyond the steps. Head tilted toward Waldo. The way people look at a house they once lived. In the year everything hurt. The portrait's varnish caught the lobby, light, and sent me back a version of my own eyes that belonged in a different face. Behind that, in the glass, I saw the upper window again. The sealed one bright for a blink. A woman stood in the light. Her hand lay against the pane like she was testing the temperature of time. The figure on the steps took one soft step up. One more would have set off the sensor if the sensor had been made for ghosts. This one had a body, though. You can tell by the gravity of a coat, by the weight of shoes on wet stone. I saw a ring of keys catch light. A lanyard swayed like a metronome. A maintenance badge hung from it with a logo I didn't recognize because it belonged to a decade that had just ended. Sir, I said, voice sharpened. Mine again. The building's closed. If you need... I used to work here, he said without looking at me. The tone was polite, well-shaped. Soaked in entitlement the way a sponge is soaked in the last sink water. Just checking a thing. My boss forgot to lock a panel once. I'm saving everyone trouble. The hand at the sealed window lifted. 2 fingers pinched like they were holding thread. She drew it tight between us. It hummed at my ear as if the line had stretched out of the phone to make a wire between floors. A single word rode that wire, no voice attached. "No, I can call campus police," I said. And he smiled the micro-smile men practice when women say the word policy. The keys at his belt chimed a little. He took the second step. My thumb found the panic button on the wall without looking. It wouldn't call anyone at this hour. It would just scream, "Don't," her wire said. Not fear this time. Strategy. I kept my hand where it was and let my mouth work like a hinge. "What panel?" I asked. "What room?" He hesitated. The lanyard's little swing slowed. He made a show of checking his phone that wasn't on. 420-something, he said. "Third floor. Copy room, maybe." "There is no copy room on 4. There is no 4 that maintenance should know." I smiled the way you smile at toddlers and dogs before you take the glass out of their mouths. "Great," I said. "Come sign in." The guest ledger lay open on the desk with a pen resting on its spine. He stepped into the lobby light and the shape he made became undeniable. Too neat for midnight. Too eager to explain. He wrote a name that looked like a name and then hesitated on the line marked affiliation. His pen hovered, fish-testing air. Finally, he put facilities with an extra loop, like a flourish could pass for permission. I nodded like I was convinced and pressed the silent duress code under the desk with my knee. It lived under the laminate like a secret tooth. Somewhere in another building, a little red light began to blink that meant, "Come look at this one, she's not alone." "I'll walk you up," I said, cool as water. "Key your access for me, okay?" I lifted my own master ring as if to compare metals. He didn't move fast enough. He measured me with that portable respect men hand out like samples. We took the stairs side by side. On 3, the counseling wing's camera sent me a grain of proof. The room where a lamp had been on, now dark. The rug straight, the coil unplugged. He glanced at the closed door as we passed. His eyes did a small arithmetic they weren't proud of. At the end of the hall, the elevator sighed without moving. The sealed 4th-floor door whispered above like a thought clearing its throat. He slowed at the east stair. "This one," he said, pointing toward the hallway we had just walked. He couldn't remember which lie he'd told. His phone lit briefly in his palm, screen pale as a guilty face. No message there. No work order. "I had enough, let's head back," I said, soft as good fabric. "I'll radio your supervisor, I didn't have to." The campus police were already in the lobby, shoes radioing to the floor. The building let me hear them. It gave me the click of belts, the zip of a jacket, the single static cough a dispatch makes when it arrives with authority behind it. He heard it too. His shoulders bunched high, a turtle thinking about shell. He glanced once toward the stairs we hadn't climbed, toward the seam I had opened with my old key. And something in his face made a shape I recognized from the ledger downstairs. Mr. F, much too forward at desk, turned away. "Actually," he said, hands out now, performance switched. "The way men relax into innocence. I can come back in the morning." "You will," I said, and the word felt like it belonged to the woman upstairs. We walked down together. He smiled at the officers with teeth that made no admission. They asked him 3 questions. He answered 2. He left with a warning none of us would file right. The door latched behind him with that delicate kiss old brass learns when it's forgiven for new sins. The panic in me didn't leave when he did. It had learned a longer shape. I stood at the desk until my legs burned and my liver-thick coffee went room temperature. The phone receiver was hot against my ear even though I'd hung it up. When I looked, it lay in its cradle with the coil slack and well-behaved. The line wasn't off. It was listening. "Thank you," I said, to the seal, to the portrait, to the window that had learned how to be a lighthouse. The ledger upstairs was waiting when I went back. My name had a second mark beside it now, not a check. 2 small vertical lines like a doorframe. Under it, in the matron's hand, 1 more entry. 319. Intruder diverted. Girls accounted. Watch maintained. Do you sleep? I asked, feeling the mean of the question the second it left. Her answer took the time a staircase takes to forget your feet. After, she said. When is after? When you blink. I started to argue. My eyes had learned tonight, but the window over the quad answered for her. A lamp beside a bed burned in a room that hadn't been open in 100 years. The shade threw its particular trapezoid onto the floorboards. A woman sat in the chair by the door, spine straight, hands folded over a ledger. She didn't look out. She watched in dawn bled into the brick by 5. The campus shook itself awake. A groundskeeper pushed leaves into neat griefs. A student jogged with a face like she was arguing with air. My relief showed up with a paper cup and a sorry in her mouth. I signed the shift sheet and didn't write the parts that would get me laughed out of something I didn't want to leave. At the doors, I turned once more. The sealed floor's window held its dark like water holds a coin. As I stepped onto the stairs, my phone buzzed with a single unlogged call. No number, no voicemail, just a timestamp, 3:03 a.m., like a finger tapping a watch. I saved it under a name I hadn't earned but would answer to anyway. Watcher. Sometimes now, crossing campus after class, I catch that upper window bright for one heartbeat. I never see her face. I don't need to. The light is its own sentence. It says, "I am here, are you?" I haven't blinked since. I drove nights for a living, and that meant I learned the language of headlights. You start to tell the difference between a tired tourist and a local by the way their beams sway. You learn how fog talks back when you cut into it at 60. You learn that Highway 101 is only beautiful in postcards. After midnight, it's a vein running along the ocean with a pulse you can feel through the steering wheel. I took the Cannon Beach run because the tips were good and because I liked the way the road went quiet between Arch Cape and Hug Point, like the Pacific itself was telling you to keep your voice down. I didn't know there was something out there listening for when you didn't. My truck was a 97 with a failing muffler and a radio that only knew 2 stations, weather and gospel. The weather was a liar, and the gospel wanted me to forgive men I hadn't met. That night the forecast promised light coastal fog, and the gospel said God sees you even when no one else does. I rolled the window an inch to keep the windshield from sweating, and the air that came in tasted like kelp and copper. The pizzas in the warming bag behind me smelled like someone else's house. I had 2 deliveries left, both uphill, both at addresses that like to hide their numbers behind ferns. Between mile markers 30 and 29, the fog thickened into a wall. The trees on the inland side became rumors. The west was just a sound of water moving weight. I eased off the gas and tried to get the wipers to learn a rhythm. The beam from my headlights crawled along the white line like it was afraid to be seen. The gospel station fizzed into static and the weather returned with a buoy report I didn't need. When the road curved, something flashed in the high beams. Fabric where no fabric should be, a ripple like there was a curtain hung across the lane. I tapped the brakes. The truck nosed down. The fabric didn't blow away, it gathered itself. It stood. At first I thought it was a deer tangled in tarp. Then it took a step toward me and the step was human. The bandages had been white once. Now they held the colors of the coast. Rust, algae, asphalt. They were wrapped around everything. Head, chest, arms, legs. Strips trailed like torn flags. He stood in my lane with his shoulders slightly forward, the posture of a man who learns to brace against a hit that always comes. I swerved left on instinct and the tires found the median rumble strip. The truck shuddered and the pizza bag thumped the back of my seat. When I straightened, he wasn't in front of me anymore. He was in the rearview mirror. He filled the frame like the mirror had been built to hold him. A head wrapped to smoothness, where a face should be. A mouth hole dark as a cave. 2 eye slits that weren't slits so much as failures, like the bandages couldn't quite hide the need underneath. His shoulders rolled as if he were laughing or breathing too hard or remembering. Behind him the lane was empty. It was just him and the white paint and the ghost of my taillights making his bandages flare red as the brake pedal trembled under my foot. I don't remember deciding to floor it. The truck did that by itself. The speedometer climbed into a number lawmen don't let you keep. The mirror rattled with the road and he didn't blur. He stayed sharp, the way certain ideas stay sharp even after you drink. The mouth hole widened like he was smiling without lips. The smell hit then. Not rot exactly. Not hospital exactly. Iodine. And wet newspaper and the copper of a coin held too long between your teeth. Not tonight, I said, because words make shape for panic. No, not me. The radio came back to life, not the gospel, not the weather. A voice that could have been an old dispatcher from 1978. Northbound, slow your roll, do not stop. On the shoulder, do not. Then just a hiss, the kind that carries other sounds like a tide carries wood. Under the hiss, a wet shuck of something dragging itself along metal. The truck bed groaned. He was on me. The weight changed. You know your own rig. You feel when there's an extra 100 pounds where there shouldn't be any. The shocks complained. The sheet metal gave a little. The sound moved from tailgate to cab, a slow crawl, a body getting its purchase, a patience that didn't belong to anything alive. I glanced at the speedometer again. Too fast for the curve that was coming. I knew it by the way the guardrail began to think about existing out of the fog. I eased off the gas. The bandages slapped the back window like a wet towel. I didn't scream. I think that matters. I put both hands on the wheel and drove like the road was the only thing that didn't want me dead. The phone on the seat lit, with a notification I couldn't read, and then, without me touching it, started dialing. The speaker stayed dark, but I heard the ring in the air like the truck had made its own mouth. What's your emergency? A woman said, steady, not ready yet to believe what she would. Something's on my truck, I said. Something, someone, he's wrapped in. The word bandages stuck. Childish, stupid. Like I was calling in a Halloween prop. The operator said, "Sir, are you injured?" Behind me, the bandage man's hand, gloved in strips that had once been clean, slid down over the glass. 5 digits. A palm. A map of whatever had burned him into not leaving. He tapped once. Twice. The third tap left a circle of moisture like breath. He leaned the wrapped head enough that the eye place was level with mine. Through the slit, there was nothing to see. That was worse than seeing. There's a particular kind of terror when you realize the void can look back. "Sir?" the operator said. "Are you in Cannon Beach jurisdiction?" "Yes," I lied, because the part of 101 I was on doesn't care what town has paper for it. "He's on my truck." "Who?" "The one they tell stories about," I said. "The one who eats raw meat, rips antennas, smashes windows, jumps beds for a laugh." I didn't say any of that. Those are tourist words. Mine were smaller. The bandages. The operator went quiet for a half second, like she had pushed her chair away from the desk and turned off the part of her brain that remembers what county budgets say is real. "Do not stop," she said, the words hard and memorized. "Head to the police station. Do not stop for any reason." "Copy," I said, and the word didn't belong to me. It belonged to men who talk on radios to stay in the world. I took the next curve at a speed I'll deny, and the truck fishtailed just enough to spit gravel at the guardrail. The bandage man didn't lose purchase. He rode the slide like a surfer in a story you wouldn't tell your kid. The smell thickened until my throat locked around it. Salt, iodine, burnt gauze, the Pacific making someone of you. The windshield fogged over from the inside. The defroster wheezed like a smoker and gave up. I wiped it with the heel of my hand and my skin came away slick. Not blood, not condensation. Something else. The gospel station found me for one beat. He's an on-time God, yes he is. And then the speaker popped and a whisper came through from less than an inch away from my ear. Hungry. It wasn't a threat, it was a report. A fact sent ahead of itself like a bill. A red stoplight appeared in the fog ahead, like a single eye. I did what the operator said not to do. I stopped. Reflex. Law. The electric hum of the light drew a circle around me. In that circle, the world is a small room. The bandage man's hand crept up to the roof of the cab and the metal above my head dented an inch. Another inch. Another. A fingernail, if that's what it was, scraped the paint with the sound that makes a dog hide. The light turned green. I didn't move. I was listening to the ocean. Or maybe I was listening to the space the ocean leaves for men like him. On the passenger side, something knocked soft, polite, the way last orders sound when a bartender likes you. I turned my head slow and there he was, inches from the glass, bandages flittering with a wind that wasn't, mouth hole open. From inside that hole came a smell that dragged a memory I didn't own. The taste of ether on cotton, the way a hand on your chest feels when it's measuring if you'll stay. He raised his hand and laid it against the window like I was something to keep. I laid mine against his because that's what you do when a gesture arrives from the oldest part of human language. The glass frosted under his palm. The engine coughed, died. Everything went dark except the single halo of the traffic light going yellow for nobody. Please, I said, and didn't know who I meant. The gauze around his head tightened like a grin pulled by strings. He leaned in, slow, so I could learn how far a person can come through a window without opening it. The wrapped head kept coming until the glass found its limit, and his weight made the window groan in its track. No breath fogged from him, only that ring of frost where his palm pressed, a white flower blooming under gauze. I could hear the ocean through the seam in the door, a long wet inhale that never finished. The light above the intersection ticked to yellow for nobody and back to red like it had given up on laws when I did. I turned the key. The starter coughed dry and quit. The second try made a grinding animal noise that said don't. The third made nothing at all. The cab dimmed in a way electricity shouldn't. The gospel station flickered, back on for one word, deliver, and died like a prayer that forgot who it was too. He tapped the glass with one knuckle. Once. Twice. The third tap sank into the window like he'd pushed his finger through frost and found a nerve. Hungry, he said again, and it wasn't a threat. Just a weather report from inside a man. The pizzas breathed in the warming bag behind me, cardboard holding heat the way hands hold water. I don't know why I reached back. Survival makes you barter with whatever's in arm's reach. I popped the zipper and steamrolled out salt and fat and oregano, turning the cab into a kitchen that wasn't mine. His wrapped head tipped, bandages whispering against themselves. The mouth hole widened without moving. I cracked the window an inch because fear makes you stupid, and because something in me wanted to see if heat had anything to say to him. I slid the nearest box toward the gap. His fingers, bandages wound to a thumb's width, came through first, cautious, like he remembered breaking things he didn't mean to. The box's corner disappeared into the cloth, and then the whole thing moved outside without friction, like the space between inside and out had been rehearsing for this handoff all night. He didn't open the lid. He pressed the box flat to the mouth hole, and the cardboard sagged as if the heat were being pulled through it. Cheese smell went metallic. Steam went silent. The box cooled in a heartbeat and fell away, empty, darker. He made a sound then, low and satisfied. A noise a burned man might make when the bath turns warm for the first time in a hospital no one can afford. While he fed on nothing, I turned the key again. The truck shuddered, considered me, and came back to life ragged. The green light turned and I went with it. rolling through the intersection like it was a boundary I could fool. The speedometer climbed to honest numbers. For a blessed half-mile there was only road and fog and the low hum of the tires. Then his hand slid down the passenger glass again, a map of fingers making the window briefly human. He was hanging from the mirror with his other arm, elbow hooked, the rest of him a flag. He still had the dead box and he offered it back like this was commerce. "More," he said, patient as a meter. Arcadia's turnout flashed by on the right, the wooden sign a dark rectangle with the ocean's roar behind it. "Can't," I said. "We're done." My mouth had learned sheriff tone from a man I'd only ever seen at traffic school. He didn't argue. He moved. He swung up onto the hood with a crawl that sounded like wet rope, turned flat on his chest and laid his head on the warm metal like a child on a stove that isn't hot yet. The hood ticked under him. The heat gauge climbed a needle's width. I hit the washer and wipers out of reflex and the blades smeared something that wasn't water into gray ropes. He didn't lift his head. He was listening to the engine. "Sir, are you en route to Cannon Beach PD?" the operator said in my speaker. Her voice suddenly there as if it had been following me at 50 yards and finally caught up. "We have units aware." "He's on my hood," I said, calmly enough that I knew the calm belonged to panic. "Do not stop. Do not pull over. Do not." The bandage man turned his rapt face toward the glass, inches from mine, and the mouth hole widened again. "Back," he said, not to me, to the road hug point. I knew before the sign. The sound the tide makes against that shelf is different. Deeper. A throat clearing forever. The old wagon road cut into rock lay somewhere in the fog to my right. The beach access a dark idea. He tapped twice on the hood, a mechanic's code. "Back." I gripped the wheel until my knuckles clicked. "No," I said, as much to the truck as to him. "We're going forward." "Copy," the operator said. "Stay on 101, turn on Hemlock at the light." "Hemlock, town, people, fluorescent paper, law." I said copy again, because words can put distance where there isn't any. The Ecola Creek Bridge appeared out of nowhere like a white rib cage, and the truck rolled onto it feeling suddenly light. Like water had learned a way into the fuel lines. The engine coughed once and died again. The wheel went hard. I coasted, praying without naming it. The hood under him gave off one last heat sigh. He slid to the very edge and sat up, listening. The town lights ahead blinked once and went out as if the night had inhaled them. A brief, simple blackout. The kind you blame on wind and old wires and never on a man made of bandage deciding he prefers darkness. The truck coasted to a stop on the far side of the bridge. A streetlight blinked back to life by the post office and painted us for a second. He looked small in that light. Not monstrous, just ruined. The gauze was not one thing. It was 100 days layered, some strips black at the edges where flame had tried language, some green with the ocean he couldn't leave. Beneath them, the contour of a face the world had sanded down. He oozed down off the hood and stood in front of the bumper, inches from the grill, listening to the engine tick itself cold. He lifted his head toward me and I understood the impulse to put my hand out like you do to a dog you aren't sure of. The glove box had an emergency flare I'd never used. Magnetic base, bright, hot. The sane part of me said leave it. The other part said heat is the only word he speaks. I took it out. It clicked in my hand, a red mouth waiting for a match. I cracked the cap. The smell of chemicals should have reminded me of high school games and highway shoulders. It reminded me of hospitals. I struck it. The flare bloomed into pink-white fire and the cab filled with the kind of light that makes you see the bones in your fingers. He didn't recoil, he leaned. He brought both hands up to the glass, palms spread like a man at communion. The heat passed through. The flame guttered like something had sucked the air around it. He took it without taking it and my arm jerked against a pull that didn't move skin but did move heat. The flare went dark in my hand. A sudden dead weight, metal rod cooling fast. The smell of burnt gauze got thicker, then thin. "Warm," he said, with something like thanks under it. "Sir?" the operator said, suddenly louder as if she'd leaned closer to the mic wherever she was. "We lost your ping. Are you at Ecola? Units are close." Blue light stuttered at the far end of Hemlock, two cruisers turning toward the bridge. Their spin carved the fog into sheets. The bandage man cocked his head. He didn't look afraid. He looked inconvenienced. He stepped sideways off the center line, and the ocean's draw deepened in my ear as if someone had untied a knot in the tide. He lifted one hand and made a small beckon. Back. My foot found the brake and held it without me. My other foot went to the gas, stupidly, uselessly. The key turned by itself and the engine coughed like it had remembered a prayer the gospel used to sing. The truck rolled forward, not toward the police lights, but toward the right-hand turn I had no business making, the short road to the beach access at Hug Point, the one with the sign that threatens you nicely about tides. I fought it, and the wheel said, "Not tonight, not your idea." We bumped onto gravel. The fog thinned enough to show the black mouth of the sea caves and the brief triangle of wet sand between the shelf and the wash, where people pose for photos when the tide minds its manners. He went ahead of me, shoulders forward, hands down, like a man who hurts when he runs. The surf threw a sheet that reached his feet and slid away. He didn't sink. He didn't reflect. He stopped at the lip of rock where the old road vanishes and turned his rapt head until the eye place found me. Back, he said one more time, and it wasn't a command anymore. It was a direction, a place that wants what it's owed. The passenger lock popped up. The tide boomed closer, one long, patient syllable. I reached for the handle without deciding to. I don't remember deciding to open the door, only the hard click of the latch and the way the night leaned into the cab like it had been waiting for its cue. Cold slid across my shins. He didn't climb in so much as arrive, folding himself into the passenger seat with the care of a man who knows where he's broken. The bandages whispered. The smell of iodine and wet paper filled the truck until my teeth tasted tin. He closed the door without touching it. The lock button settled with a little sigh, like the truck was grateful to be contained with him rather than exposed to whatever made him. Back, he said, not looking at me, and pointed through the windshield toward the black mouth where the old wagon road disappears under the shelf at Hug Point. "You'll drown," I said, and the word sounded foolish in a voice that shook. He turned the wrapped head a fraction, as if the concept of drowning amused something in him that water couldn't reach. The tide boomed closer, a long-shouldered sound that lifts the hair on your forearms. Gravel cracked under the tires as the truck crept forward without help from my foot. The beam picked out driftwood, kelp ropes, the wet gleam of rock. The ocean blinked its white eye and shut it again. I eased the wheel left, then right, gauging the narrow tongue of sand the tide still allowed. He pressed his palm to the dash, flat, hungry for heat, and the vents blew hotter though I hadn't touched the controls. The temp needle climbed like a small red prayer. At the lip of the shelf I stopped because there was nowhere else to go. The headlight beam died on stone. Water breathed in, touched the bumper with a polite hello, and slid back, dragging sand. The sea cave waited where the beam ended, a hollow with its own weather. In the cave, for a second, the dark learned edges, a wall slick with algae, the shallow bowl of rock where flood tides keep their secrets, a deeper pocket cut by winter storms that teaches summer what grief is. He uncurled his fingers from the dash and turned toward me, slow, careful, the way a man turns after his skin has become a map of rehearsed movements. From beneath the wrap at his throat, a sound rose that might once have been a word before flame and salt argued it down. He pointed at the glove box. I opened it, flares, a lighter. An old shop rag still stained with the color of a life that had taught me engines in a father's driveway. He took the rag. He pressed it to the mouth hole the way the living hold coffee to their faces in December. "Warm," he said again, and for the first time it sounded close to thank you. The water came farther on the next breath, slid higher up the tire, retreated. The truck rocked a little. The radios in town crackled faint and then died. Somewhere behind us, the distant shape of blue made a new decision. I should have thrown the truck in reverse. I should have backed us out before the tide took the steering from my hands. Instead, I watched the bandage man turn toward the cave like a man about to step through a door he built with his own ruin. "How?" I asked because questions are a way to stay human and I felt mine wearing thin. How did you end up here? He didn't answer. The bandages did. A wind rose off the water and plucked them, and I heard in the whisper of cloth against cloth the shapes of words I already knew. Fire, sawdust, ether on cotton, wheels, a road that didn't forgive. A truck not mine, a young man not me, a laugh at the wrong second, a curve that says later you should have slowed. White strips wrapped quick by hands not trained for surgery, then tighter by other hands that knew only how to bind a problem until someone else could name it. No someone else came. The ocean learned him instead. He put his hand on the passenger handle. The latch clicked. He didn't wait for me to invite him out. He stepped onto the sand and the sand didn't take him. He left no prints. The water climbed and fell and left a ring around his ankles the color of rusted gauze. He walked to the cave with the tilt of a man whose balance belongs to someone who isn't here to return it. At the mouth he stopped and looked back through the glass until the eye place found mine. Come, he said. I shook my head. He waited. The tide flung a sheet and slid back. The cave exhaled cold that smelled like iron regrets. It would take 2 steps to reach him, 3 to follow him in. Not many to vanish into a throat the ocean uses when it swallows in its sleep. He raised his empty hand and made a small turn of the wrist. A gesture my father once used when he wanted me to pass him a tool he hadn't named because he trusted me to know which. The flare. I cracked another. The flame punching daylight into the cab. The heat blooming on my knuckles in a brightness that made memory loud. I climbed out. Water licked my boots and retreated with a hiss. The flare's white noise made the night seem briefly honest. I held it out. He didn't take it. He leaned in and let the heat go through the bandages and into whatever map of nerve and want lived beneath. The flame dimmed, came back, dimmed again, fighting the draw. He stepped backward into the cave 1 pace and again the flare sagged as if air had been negotiated. I followed to the lip and looked in. The cave wasn't deep. 3 truck lengths. A stone bowl in the back where driftwood collects and dries long enough to lie about being dry. Black scars climbed the rock where fires had burned beneath tides that didn't care. In the bowl sat something that could have been a stump or a wreckage or a patient chair washed season after season into the only shape a cave knows. He stepped to it and sat. He set his palms on the stone like a man testing a pew for creaks. The flare's heat licked the bandages and the bandages gave back a smell that wasn't pain, but the memory of it. The ocean took a breath and held it. The flare guttered a 3rd time and went out, a sudden dark that rang like a bell. I couldn't see him, but I knew where he was. The night knew him for me. The truck behind me ticked as it cooled. Far down the beach, a dog barked at a life it would never understand, and the sound didn't come here. It bent around us. In the dark, he said a word the bandages could not soften. Home. The tide came in hard then, not angry, final. Water shouldered my shins. Cold slammed the ache up my legs. I stepped backward into air that wasn't there, caught myself on the bumper, half fell, shoved the door open with my hip, and pulled myself into the truck hand over wet hand. I twisted the key. The engine coughed like a drowned man and caught. Headlights painted the cave mouth in a weak wash. In their smear I could see him still seated, head bowed, as if he had finally arrived somewhere that would take him. As if warmth were not a thing to be stolen but given until a man can make his own. I put the truck in reverse. The tires spun once. Sand fumed. The second try lifted us. We grumbled back onto gravel and the sea slapped the shelf with a single palm like a job finished. I looked back at the cave. The bandage man wasn't there. In the beam, the bowl held only driftwood and the shape of a seat that had never been a seat. A strip of gauze lay at the waterline snagged on a stone, and when the water lifted it, it didn't move. It dissolved. On Hemlock, the town lights came back in a flicker like someone had found the switch with a sheepish laugh. The cruisers idled by the bridge, officer hats bent toward radios, a blue stutter learning gentler tempo. I pulled in front of the station anyway and sat with the engine running and my hands open on my thighs like I was waiting to be cuffed by something that had already let me go. A uniform knocked on the glass. I told him a version that would let us both go home. A trespasser, a man on my hood, a wrong turn to the beach and a scare I didn't intend to revisit. He wrote what he could in boxes. He asked if I wanted to file. I said no because there was nothing to file except a night and a heat and a word that makes the chest hurt. When I got back in, the cab still smelled like antiseptic and a cold ocean that wants your name. On the passenger seat sat the pizza box he'd emptied. Under it, pressed flat, was a page torn from a yellow pad, the lines faint with salt. In a hand that wasn't mine, 3 words had been written with the heavy pencil strokes of a man not used to writing through wraps. Delivered. Warm. Thanks. I drove the rest of the route with the heater on high. I still do. On 101 between Arch Cape and Hug Point, I keep the defroster blowing even if July pretends it's summer. When the fog is thick and the road goes quiet enough to hear what rides it, the windshield will sometimes flower with a ring of frost the exact size of a palm. There's a tap once, twice, not asking. Taking attendance, I tap back. I keep driving. I don't stop on the shoulder, but some nights, when the tide is low and the air tastes like burned rope, I leave a flare in the glove box and an extra pizza in the warming bag, just in case a man who's all bandage and hunger remembers that warmth is a door he can still walk through.